Well, I'm joined now by General Sir Richard Barrons, who's the Commander of Joint Force Command here and attended. You saw him laying a wreath at the ceremony here at Northwood. And this was your second ceremony today, wasn't it?
It is. I attended at my old school, which is just down the road, for a very similar event.
What does remembrance mean to you?
Well, I think for all the members of the armed forces, this is the day we remember the enormous contribution and sacrifice of our predecessors in past conflicts. And my goodness, that's several centuries of really tough history. I think for all of us, it reminds us that war is something to be taken very seriously, to be entered into after a tremendous amount of thought, and that it always brings terrible consequences. And for everybody here in Northwood, we remember our own colleagues in recent campaigns who've not made it back, and we remember those who are on operations today around the world.
What were you thinking about during the ceremony?
You know, I always think about the people that I knew personally that were killed or seriously injured in operations, and I think all of us think about those moments when it might have been us.
Indeed, and also today, important to remember that for many people in the armed forces who've been bereaved, remembrance happens every day of the year.
Yes, I think terrible loss is something that you never get over, you sort of get past it. And so for our families and indeed colleagues, this is something you just have to manage in your life. And it's never going to be completely easy, but we'll always do what we can to help.
97 years of Armistice Day. Do you think it's changed in its feel over the years? I mean, I'm not expecting you to go back 97 years, but in terms of what it's changed in recent times, and also the end of the campaign in Afghanistan in terms of the combat operation.
I think for British society at large, it has changed because the current generation, those of us who are living our adult lives now, our lives have not been shaped by the sort of conflict that our forebears saw in the First and Second World War, so it probably touches more people indirectly. I think for those of us that have taken part in modern conflicts, it's still as personal as ever. And I think for the nation as a whole, it's a good moment to reflect that, you know, we've been really lucky and we've avoided big wars for some time. It does not mean the future could necessarily not bring that back to us, and we need to think about that.
How do you think that the armed forces can reach out to young people to make them understand the importance of Armistice Day?
Well, I think it's by being in the public eye, by running events and visiting schools where people can have a discussion and an interaction with today's members of the armed forces. After all, we need to remember that the members of the armed forces come from society and they go back there. So, you know, we are citizens too.
Of course, there wouldn't be an Armistice Day without war. How do you think the nature of war has changed and is changing?
Well, I use definitions which I think many in uniform will recognise, which the nature of war doesn't change. It's always brutal and bloody and generally disappointing for everyone taking part. But the way war is fought does change through technology and methods. So our predecessors would recognise the blood and guts and the tragedy of war. They wouldn't recognise necessarily ballistic missiles, cyber and many of the other forms of technology that we would employ in conflict today.
And just finally, a word to families, to people, friends, colleagues who will be mourning people today.
Well, they need to remember they are always in our thoughts and our hearts. And in the UK Armed Forces, we look after our own. And today is a good time to remember we will look after our families.